and you're definitely demonstrating the skills that you're learning in the class. So now that we've spent the first half of the class working through how to conduct research, where to find good scholarly sources, how to evaluate those sources, cite those sources both in the paragraph text of your work and also at the end of your work in the form of full citations. We've mastered those skills. We've had a lot of opportunity to practice them, and we've placed those into the IRP assignment. And now, in the last half of the class, we're going to be turning our attention toward argument, which is a good particular form of persuasion. You probably have done some argumentative and persuasive writing in the past. As we think about argument, it's important that we remember that it's not quite the same thing as persuasion. Argumentation is persuasion, but persuasion is not argument, and we'll talk about that further down the road in this week's video lecture. So we have that to look forward to as we develop the skills for argument specifically. We've already gained those skills that have helped us to find good sources to inform our audiences, and now we want to pivot and develop additional skills so that we can argue effectively using academic tone and without using logical fallacies. So we're going to be discussing those things in the coming weeks as we get started on the ARP assignment. And you'll see in the discussion boards this week when you start with the week 9 discussion board, you'll see that there's some notes that I've left there with regard to double dipping in this class. And I figured that that might also be well explained if I went ahead and led into that here in this introduction. So double dipping in this course refers to using the same topic that you've used for your IRP for your ARP. And so not every topic will be compatible for doing this, but you may have a topic that you've written about in an informative way. You're now a resident expert on whatever that topic is, and now you'll be able to transition that and form an argument out of that and use the same topic and likely a number of the same sources that you've used in the IRP in the ARP. So absolutely you can do that. That is not cutting corners, but I mentioned the availability of doing this and want to be careful about mentioning some caveats. One is that just because you could use the same sources for a work that helped you to inform your audience on that topic, those same sources may not serve you as well if your purpose now is to argue a specific point about that topic. So keep that in mind. You may have excellent, wonderful sources, but they may have been more geared toward the IRP. They may have had lots of information about the topic, not necessarily something that would help you research-wise to make an effective argument. So you'll have to be the judge here, just like you are the judge of source quality, whether or not a source should be carried over if you're going to retain the same topic between the IRP and the ARP. Another caveat to mention is that you can use the same topic, but you can't use the same writing that you've done before in the IRP. So you may have background information that you would like to share with your reader in your ARP. One thing to be really careful about is that you cannot reuse your own work. So it's possible to plagiarize yourself. That's a lot of things students don't often recognize, that copying your own writing, whether that's from a paper you've written for this class previously or any other class or just for fun, anything that you've written before would need to be cited just like a source if you were going to reuse it. So just be careful that because you can carry some things over from IRP to ARP, make sure that you're still not falling into a chasm where you're plagiarizing, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. So probably the biggest consideration you need to give for whether you want to double dip in the course and use the same topic that you've used for your IRP, for your ARP, is really just your genuine level of enthusiasm. After you've been researching on a topic for 7 or 8 weeks, you may never want to look into this topic ever again. You may be experiencing burnout. You may be kind of tired of that topic and exhausted with writing about it. And a lot of students do feel that way. So if you feel your enthusiasm for the topic waning, even though you can see the silver lining and continuing on with it, I would suggest that you find a new and different topic that will serve as a good shot in the arm for you in terms of enthusiasm to go back to the drawing board. And it will also give you some more batting practice with finding excellent sources and annotating and reviewing them, because you'll be doing that again for the ARP process. So that's something to keep in mind. If, however, you feel super passionate about your IRP topic, if you felt as you were drafting the IRP and finishing up that you kind of felt a little bit itchy at times, that the informative voice wasn't quite satisfying you as a writer because you have a strong opinion about the topic, you have a lot to say about it, then this might be a good opportunity for you to write the essay that you've always wanted to write, because now you're sort of unlimited and unbridled as you can approach the topic from an argumentative standpoint. So these are just some things to think about. The assignment prompt is up this week, and then early next week we'll be submitting the topic proposals, which you could, if you'd like, begin working on now. All of the assignments that are associated with the IRP, beginning with the topic proposal, working through the working bibliography, the 2 draft sections, and then the final draft. All of those assignments are outlined in the one document that's already posted on our course page. So don't waste time in reviewing that. You'll see a lot of similarities in terms of how we move through the assignment. It mirrors exactly what we've done for the IRP. So you've done it once, and you can do it again using argument. That's the structure of this course. So there's some notes about that. And now we've got some thoughts on argument. So let me how do I share my screen here? Let's see. Enter full screen. Yeah, that's not helping me. Sorry, guys, that you're listening to me babble here as I figure this out. Oh, here we go. This big button that says share screen. Duh. All right. Now I'm sharing my, I want to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So now you're seeing my monitor and me. And I have this presentation that's short and sweet on argumentation and persuasion. So, also, just so you're aware, because I forgot to plug this in, the code word for this week is cookie, C-O-O-K-I-E. I usually have a graphic for this, and I spell it out, but if you are just as big a fan of Girl Scout cookie time as I am, you probably are familiar with cookies and their spelling and their nature and their general deliciousness. So cookie is the code word for this week, C-O-O-K-I-E. Cookie, just singular, no S on the end, just cookie. Just one single solitary cookie. So that is the code word. Make a note of that if you like, and be sure and plug that in for this week's BBQ. It's ready for you on the course page. And so, all right, now we'll move into argumentation and persuasion. So is there a way that I can get rid of this video? Because it just feels weird to me. I guess I'll just drag myself up here. It's always weird to record yourself where you can see it at the same time. If you've never done this, it's kind of strange. And I also am on like cat patrol, watching for furry friends to come in and interrupt these videos and meow and be needy. So there's just a lot going on, but we're going to truck through it. All right, so argumentation and persuasion. There really is a difference between persuasion and argument. So imagine persuasion here as really an umbrella term. So persuasion has lots of different modes, and argument is one of those modes that falls under it. So they're often used interchangeably. They may have even been used interchangeably in English 101. If you wrote the essay 4 assignment is generally persuasive or argumentative, and you may have thought that those are interchangeable, and they actually really aren't. So persuasion, again, is that broad term, that umbrella term, and persuasion in general just relates to, like this slide says, how we move people to a specific position, a belief, or taking a course of action. We're always getting people to do one of those things. We want them to believe something, to do something, or to adopt a position that we're recommending, okay? Under persuasion, that umbrella, argument is a specific mode of persuasion. And when we argue, and all of us have had great arguments in our lifetimes, I'm sure, argument here is a specific kind of persuasion, and that is really centered on using logic and reasoning. So there are lots of different appeals that we can use to persuade someone. You probably also talked about these in 101. We'll kind of go back for a quick review in a few slides here. But argument is specifically centered on using the principles of logic and reasoning, which is why we're using scholarly sources. We're conducting research, because all of that allows us to make these logical, reasonable, deductive sort of recommendations in what we are arguing. So that's important. So in everyday life, we use argument and persuasion in all kinds of ways, okay? So this isn't a standalone assignment that you should be asking yourself, why am I ever going to be using this ever again? Why would I ever do this? Really, this is a pretty functional skill that you'll use in adult life, that you'll use in professional life. You'll use it forever. So here are just some examples, and we'll quickly go through these because a lot of these are self-evident, but if you're appealing for a grade, if you're going to be gone from class and you'd like a professor to allow you to take a quiz when you return, you're going to be using tactics of persuasion to do this, arguing in traffic court, negotiating things, whether that's the price of a new car, or you're working with a realtor to buy a home, all kinds of stuff. Anything negotiation is clearly going to fall under persuasion, and also by extension perhaps argument. In academic life, here we are right now, and you're going to be arguing your own ideas, your own stances on things. Those you'll be using argument and persuasion for. Engaging others in intellectual debate, particularly as you spot logical fallacies used by people whose arguments you're not quite sure about. You'll sort of develop an app for your ears as we learn about logical fallacies, and you'll start to hear logic patterns and patterns of reasoning a little bit differently once we learn about those. Certainly on the job, you're going to be filling your time with arguing and persuading people to do things. So if you're in a supervisory role, getting people to get on board with things, to listen to your ideas, to feel positive about a change that you're going to be making where in your workplace. Certainly you don't just argue or persuade those who respond to you. You also sort of persuade and argue upward that you are worthy of a raise or a promotion. All of these are argumentative and persuasive points. So, and then in writing, reading, and listening, we use argument and persuasion all the time. We've already been doing this a lot. You probably wrote 5-paragraph persuasive essays in 4th, 5th grade, and have built on those skills since then. What I think is really fun about argument is that it really is not as formulaic as your K-12 experience might have indicated. There really are a lot of ways that you can organize and pattern a persuasive or an argumentative written argument. Speeches can be very, very powerful and persuasive. And argumentative. And so all of these things are things that you will have experience with in your lifetime. And so we're just sort of refining those skills here, specifically as they relate to argument. So an argument differs from just persuasion in general because it involves the process of establishing a claim. And when you hear that word claim, you should also be sort of hearing as a secondary word, like the harmony beneath that word claim, is the word thesis. When we talk about a claim, a thesis and a claim in an argument should really be the same thing. You're outlining that claim at the same time that you are giving away your thesis in your opening paragraph. And then what follows that opening paragraph, that introduction where you lay out that claim in the form of a thesis statement, is moving through that argument patterned through logical reasoning, good examples, and research. In our case, scholarly research. So, all right. The rhetorical triangle is something that I think is really important for us to sort of keep in mind as we move through the process of deciding on a topic, and also the process of finding sources and evaluating sources, and also, and most especially, how we organize our writing when you're arguing in a written form. So here we have the rhetorical triangle. It comes from our homie Aristotle. So this has been in play for literally millennia. We've been working off of this playbook from Aristotle for a long, long time, and that's probably because it's a good one. So what we have are 3 different appeals, and there are additional appeals, but these are the 3 ones that relate to persuasion. So when Aristotle talked about persuading someone through all of the available means of persuasion, he's talking about logos, ethos, and pathos. And these may not be new terms for you, but in case they are, I wanted to sort of go back and review these because it is important to keep the rhetorical triangle in mind as you develop an argument. So we know that persuasion as an umbrella really relies on all 3 of these appeals. They work together harmoniously in a lot of persuasive cases. So we have ethos, which is your credibility as a writer. It's also the credibility of the sources that you use. And so we established ethos. When we go back and we think about the IRP assignment, ethos came into play as you and I negotiated which sources you should use and shouldn't use. Is this worthy of inclusion? Does this positively reflect on you as a writer? Is this credible enough to really warrant inclusion and discussion on this important topic? So all of those things satisfy ethos as a persuasive appeal. Then we have pathos, and a lot of people confuse pathos with ethos because pathos is really emotionally based. A persuasive appeal that uses pathos is emotional. And the best example, the one that always comes right to mind for me, are the sappy ASPCA commercials. You know, where they've got the dogs and the cats in the cages with the gooey eye, and then you've got Sarah McLachlan singing in the background, and it's super sad, and they're asking for a donation to save these poor animals. And if you haven't turned to the channel as soon as you hear the music, that's the appeal of that specific commercial. It's tugging at your heartstrings. It's appealing to your values and your beliefs. It really makes an appeal really based exclusively on emotion. There's not a whole lot of information that they give you, if you'll recall, in those commercials. They give you some information, not specifically. They're not saying, according to a study by the blah, 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 blah. It's not a logical appeal at all. It's really a purely emotional one. So that's pathos. And a lot of people confuse pathos with ethos because they think emotion and pathos, and then confuse that with the E in ethos. So again, just to recap, ethos relies on character and credibility. Pathos is emotional appeal, values, and beliefs. And then we have the third appeal, and this is the one that relates to argument. So that's logos. So logos is information. So you really probably use some ethos in your IRP essay as you determined which sources you would use and how you would use them. Are they credible enough? Is this person really an expert on this subject? Someone that I could quote? And how can I project my own ethos so that my reader will take me seriously? But really, you relied on logos here. So you were relying on information, data, statistics, rational stuff. All of that falls under logos. And logos is really easy to remember because you've got logic and logos. Logic and logos go together. So when we think about an argumentative essay, we're not ignoring ethos and pathos at the bottom of the triangle, but really we are fully leaning in to logos. We really intend to make an argument that's rational, that's supported by data and information, and people who are experts who can credibly release that information. And again, part of that's logos, part of that is ethos. But really, when we are writing a persuasive essay, we can use pathos a lot. We can use hypothetical examples. There was this experience that I encountered, that blah, 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 and the story that follows might sort of tug at the heartstrings of your reader. It might be personally compelling, emotionally compelling, and we really back off of that when we argue. So this is why it's important to keep the rhetorical triangle in mind, because logos is right there up at the top, and it's really important that we form our argument around things that are rational and logical. That's the basis of argument. If we're not forming an argument around rational and informative stuff, good research, good data, good numbers, all of these things, we're really not writing an argument. We're really being persuasive. And when we are persuasive, using pathos, specifically these emotional appeals, it can be very, very easy for us to fall out of academic tone. It can be very difficult for us to maintain the use of academic tone and avoid first person. So when we lean into those emotional appeals, we tend to want to make it about us and our experience and sort of projecting that onto the audience. And it's important that we avoid that in argumentative writing. So think logos, lean into logos, and remember that that's really the central appeal of argumentative writing. Otherwise, persuasion uses all three, but that's really not the goal here. We're using a specific mode of persuasion, which really leans into logos. So moving forward, when you think about a topic, and this might be where if you're trying to figure out if your IRP topic will work for the ARP, run it through this quick checklist. So is this an issue that's open to debate? Let's think about together, maybe there's a topic that doesn't really have, that pretty much people agree with, okay? Like, I don't know. Oh, when you bring your infant home from the hospital, if you've had a newborn infant, that infant should be placed in a car seat. Okay, you think that most people probably would agree with that. I think that that's a pretty good idea. You don't want to just have a newborn baby just hanging out in your lap as you drive home. So if you don't have a debatable issue, you don't really have an argument. So you're trying to figure out sort of where the line of controversy is. You don't want it to be something that would be impossible to argue, something that many, many people could never buy into. And you can probably think of some topics that the public would be like, what? That's crazy. That's really out there. You do want to find something that you will have some challenge in getting people on board. And that doesn't mean that people have to be morally opposed to what you're saying. Maybe the public maybe this is a new, fresh issue and people just don't know about it. Maybe you're trying to get people to change a behavior and you think that if people had more information and data and statistics about it, that they would be more likely to do that. So there's all kinds of things that will be topics and issues that are open to debate that would be excellent choices here. You just want to make sure that there's a little bit of controversy there, not too much, not too little. It's sort of like the Goldilocks principle. You want to find one that's kind of in the middle. It's just right. You want to figure out what your position on the issue is and your reasons for supporting that position. That will inform the claim that you make, i.e. your thesis. And it also is really important just to know that up front so that you can kind of check your own bias, because certainly that would be very easy to introduce in an argumentative writing, particularly as you structure and you research. If you kind of cherry pick sources that naturally all agree with you, then that might sort of show itself as a flaw in your writing. So being aware of your position on that issue and why you have adopted that position, that's important to know going in. And then all of this evidence that supports your reasons. Some of these things are going to come through as you do your research. So if you're carrying over your IRP topic, you may have sources that have already sort of illuminated that evidence, but you'll likely be expanding on that anyhow, even if you do keep the same topic. Okay, so your audience plays an important role. You also, in selecting your topic, want to be mindful of what do you think your audience is capable of doing? Do you think that your audience is sort of predispositioned to go along with you? Do you think you have a hostile audience, a wavering audience? And depending on what your topic is and the claim that you're making, and how strongly you're making that claim, that could impact the way that your audience reacts. So we sort of like to project and kind of forecast how the audience might respond to that issue. So some questions at the bottom of this slide to keep in mind as you think about designing this final research writing. What do you think the position is that your audience has of your issue? How strongly do they feel about it? Are they maybe just not really well informed about it? Maybe they don't have strong opinions about it. They just need more information to easily follow your argument. Are they open-minded? So are you picking something that's so controversial that people just will not be capable of being open-minded? And that's really an important part of the rationale for the few limited topics that just are off the table for this assignment. Generally being open-minded about things like abortion, gun control, capital punishment. A 5 to 6 page essay is just not going to get the majority of the population to sway their views. What else? What will their objections be to your argument? So you want to sort of project what the other side is. People who disagree with me will do that because of this and this and this. It's important to be aware of the counter argument and also to respond to that as you develop your argument. So the structure of a classical argument is pretty straightforward. We begin with an introduction. At the end of that introduction, you'll see a thesis statement. That's the specific claim that you're making, that you intend to argue and defend throughout the rest of the writing. You provide some background information. This would be the place where if you are borrowing from your IRP, you want to be really careful about not plagiarizing yourself, plagiarizing sources. As you give background information, you need to make sure that you are doing that in a way that when you're paraphrasing, summarizing, or directly quoting anyone else's ideas, including your own, that you've recorded prior to this assignment, that you cite it. And there are ways to cite yourself if you really feel like, wow, this is a pretty good paragraph in my IRP and I'd like to carry it over. How do I cite myself? Yeah, we can totally talk about that. And it's not as complicated as you might think, but you have to do it. You can't just think, well, I mean, I wrote it. Those are my ideas and they belong to me, so I can just sort of repeat them. No, you cannot. You have to cite yourself. You are officially a scholar and you can't use your own pre-published words here, okay? After we've given that background information, then we can go into the reasons and evidence, and this will make up sort of the biggest part. of your essay, because you will have a lot of reasons and evidence. You've pulled together all of these great sources. You have a lot to say. The experts that you really respect and trust, they have a lot to say about the topic. That's where you'll sort of flesh all of that out. Right before you get to your conclusion, you'll acknowledge the opposing view. This is sort of that counter argument that we were talking about on the previous slide. And you'll notice that this isn't a really balanced, talk about your perspective about 50% of the time, and then talk about the opposing view about 50% of the time. No, we're going to stack the deck. We're going to give you the greatest advantage. So about 80% of your text, maybe even more, should really be focused on you and your argument and why you think people should adopt that belief, change that behavior, adopt that position. Okay? So you want to acknowledge the opposing view. That is crediting your own ethos, your own character, your own credibility. People who see you as they read through your ARP and they see that you've acknowledged the other side, it gives your reader the impression, the assurance that you have considered this view carefully from a lot of different perspectives, and this is the conclusion that you've arrived at. So that's really what it serves here. It's just to provide balance and acknowledgement that there are other perspectives on this and what parts of those perspectives may or may not be legitimate, but it should not occupy a ton of page space in your argument. Keep your argument focused on your argument, your claim, and your reasons and evidence to support it. Give a nod to the opposing view, but don't let it sort of become a 50-50 thing. It should not be designed that way. And then you move through a conclusion, which in a lot of ways will recapitulate what you stated in the introduction. So it's probably about the structure that you anticipated and probably one that you followed before. Okay? The thesis statement cannot overstate the importance of a thesis statement. And for this reason, the thesis statement might be something that changes and evolves over the writing process. If you start your ARP draft with the introduction paragraph, I usually like to start drafting with body paragraphs and then do intro and conclusion last, but that's just what works for me. As you design the thesis, you may not love it at first. It may be kind of vague. It may not really kind of pack a punch that you want it to. But that's okay. You can have sort of a working title, a working thesis statement, and then go back and review it later. It is the most important sentence in your paper, and it should be an assertive claim. It should tell your reader what exactly you're trying to prove. It should provide clarity and detail, and it should help your reader to focus in on what this essay is about and what you intend to discuss as you move through these pages. So that should all be happening as a result of a really good, sharp, clear thesis statement. It's not a factual statement or an announcement of purpose. So it often when a thesis statement in an argumentative essay fails, it fails because it doesn't have that the teeth that an argument has. And there's a difference between being aggressive and assertive. I like assertive phrasing, and I think we can go through some examples of this. And I think when we talked about academic tone, sort of touched on that already. Keep in mind that sort of sweet spot of assertive phrasing, not anemic phrasing, not aggressive phrasing, but something that, is pushes a little bit. The reader needs to be pushed. They need to be brought along with this, and they don't want to be scared into believing, which is what will happen when you use phrasing that's too aggressive. But if you're too tenuous about it, then they may not pick up on what you're trying to get them to do, and you may not be giving them a good enough push to really motivate them to think about making a change or changing a behavior or adopting a belief. Okay? Here's some good examples. So which of these three thesis statements, they're all about the same topic, which do you think is the most effective thesis? And I'll read them for you. The first, parents, often too busy to watch television shows with their families, can monitor their children's viewing habits with the aid of the V-chip. The second thesis statement, to help parents monitor their children's viewing habits, the V-chip should be a required feature for television sets sold in the U.S. And then the third thesis statement, this paper will describe a V-chip and examine the uses of the V-chip in American-made television sets, all right? So just mill these over for a few seconds and kind of think about which, for an argumentative essay, might be the most appropriate and impactful thesis statement. Okay, so the answer here, these are all thesis statements The one that would be most appropriate for an argumentative essay is this one right here. The second one, to help parents monitor their children's viewing habits, the V-chip should. And that's where we get some argumentative phrasing. Should, not could, not might, not sometimes. The V-chip should be a required feature for television sets sold in the US. Okay, so we're making a really specific argument. The V-chip needs to be required. Okay, and it's straightforward. It's framing the essay. Now the reader's very clear about what this essay is going to be about. Let's skip down to this third one and kind of look at this for a second. If you had written about the V-chip for the IRP assignment, this would have been a pretty good thesis statement, but it doesn't have those argumentative teeth. Okay, what you're doing here is saying this paper will describe, and usually I'd sort of like a more clever approach to a thesis statement than in this essay, I will blah, 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 blah. We sort of have that similar pattern going here. So beyond that though, describing a V-chip and examining its uses in American-made television sets, that's an informative thesis statement. That tells us what you're going to be telling us about throughout the essay, but there's no argument there. You're not trying to get us to do anything. You're just giving us information. And then we have this top thesis statement: parents often too busy to watch television shows with their families can monitor their children's viewing habits with the aid of the V-chip. Okay, so we're giving some good background information. We're talking about why the V-chip, what it can do, and why it's beneficial. We get that sense from the writer that they think that this is a good thing. And then we just have can monitor. And this could be transformed into an excellent thesis statement for an argumentative essay with just changing that word can to should, ought to, need to. We just need more assertive phrasing here. So parents often too busy to watch television shows with their families should monitor their children's viewing habits. Need to monitor their children's viewing habits with the aid of the V-chip. Okay, so you can hear the difference in those, just little words, which is why we've got to be really careful and thoughtful as we craft a thesis statement, because the can, should, they really do make a big difference, and in some cases the difference between informative and argumentative. So follow those examples. Think about that as you're crafting your own thesis statement. Tone, we've talked about tone so much. We've talked about academic tone. It's really important to sort of keep it in check here, especially now that, you know, I've opened the gate and you're able to sort of go out and graze on your own and you know, shape an essay that is based on your rationale, your opinion. But you can't use I. You've got to make sure that what you're writing is consistent with academic tone. So those are the limits that a lot of writers can struggle with this assignment. So think about these. No matter how passionate you are about the issue, no matter how stupid you think people are who don't agree with you, be careful about how you phrase that, using these harsh words. Don't be careless in your phrasing. Be mindful of the reader that disagrees with you. Are there points at which the way that you're phrasing or organizing things, does it kind of pet them backwards? A lot of the time, if we are sort of harsh in how we use our words and phrases in the introduction, we lose them before we even had them. And it's really impossible to get an audience back once we've rubbed them the wrong way. So reasonable tone. We can be assertive without being aggressive. We want to make our point, letting the research and the information and the data, we want to let that speak for us and advocate for us. We don't need to stand on top of the soapbox and say, you can't do this anymore. We got to stop doing this, whatever this is in your ARP assignment. So let the sources say what you can't say in first-person perspective, okay? And we talked about that as we went through academic tone earlier. Okay, offering counterpoints, counter-arguments. Again, just like we talked about with ethos, it demonstrates your credibility as a writer. And it shows that you haven't just cherry-picked your sources, you've looked at multiple sides of this argument, you've looked at it from different perspectives, and you've made an informed decision. This is what you've arrived at, and this is what you recommend people do or think or believe, okay? And then we want to be firm but we want to be tactful. Again, a lot of this connects to academic tone. There might be some concessions that you make. There could be some really good points that the opposition makes, and it is important to acknowledge that. And doing that doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make your argument weaker. And in fact, saying that, all right, here's some good points on the other side. All right, I admit that. There are some good things they have going on. They've got this, they've got this, they've got this. All of those are good things to acknowledge. And acknowledging that lends to your ethos instead of detracting from it. Some people think that actually it sort of cheapens your own argument. It really doesn't. It makes you look more fair. And it makes you look more balanced, okay? And that's it. So these are some things to keep in mind as you think about what's argument, how it's different from persuasion. Certainly the questions that you have, I am happy to answer. You can always email me. We can always meet online. Your textbooks, you're reading in the Little Brown Handbook this week, and it's not a bad idea if you still have the Longman Reader. Anybody remember this from 101? Okay. The chapter that's on argumentation and persuasion, this might also, if you still have that text, go back and thumb through it if you're having problems sort of grasping what's the difference between argumentation and persuasion. That is in that textbook, and it would be helpful to you. But I've rattled on for quite a long time, longer than I intended to. So I'll let you go. The code word again for this video for the week's VVQ is cookie, C-O-O-K-I-E. Thank you for watching. Everybody have a great week. I hope you enjoyed spring break, and I'll catch you later on.